The morning sun painted golden streaks across the palace courtyard as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood quietly by the tall windows of their private quarters. Her fingers traced the edge of her coffee cup while she watched the guards changing positions below. Today felt different from all the other days when William had to travel for royal duties. Something in the air made her heart feel heavier than usual. William emerged from their bedroom, adjusting his navy suit jacket with practiced ease. Even after all these years of marriage, Catherine still felt her breath catch when she looked at him. The way he carried himself with quiet dignity, the gentle strength in his movements, and those kind eyes that had first captured her attention at university so many years ago. "The car will be here in 20 minutes, he said softly, walking over to where she stood. His voice carried that familiar warmth that had comforted her through countless public appearances and private moments alike. Catherine nodded, not trusting her voice just yet. This trip to Australia and New Zealand would keep them apart for 3 weeks. 3 weeks felt like an eternity when they had grown accustomed to facing everything together. The children had already said their goodbyes the night before, understanding that Papa had important work to do for the people, just as Mama had taught them. "The children were so brave last night," Catherine finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "George asked me to make sure you remember to call every day. Charlotte wants you to bring back a kangaroo, and Louis—" She paused, smiling despite the sadness. "Louis wants you to bring back the entire country." William chuckled, the sound filling the quiet room with warmth. "I promise to call every single day, even if it means waking up at impossible hours. And I'll see what I can do about that kangaroo, though I suspect Louis might have to settle for a stuffed one." They moved through their morning routine with unusual quietness. Usually, their breakfast time buzzed with conversation about the day ahead, discussions about the children's schedules, or light banter about the latest family photos that had made the newspapers. Today, they both seemed lost in their own thoughts, stealing glances at each other when they thought the other wasn't looking. Catherine had been dreading this moment for weeks. As a member of the royal family, she understood duty better than most people could imagine. She knew that William's work took him away because it mattered, because the connections he built and the causes he supported made real differences in people's lives. But understanding something intellectually and feeling ready for it emotionally were two entirely different things. "Do you remember," William said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence, "the first time I had to travel without you after we were married? You packed 17 different tea bags in my suitcase because you were worried I wouldn't find proper English tea." Catherine laughed, the memory bringing a genuine smile to her face. 17 seems reasonable. You can be quite particular about your tea. And if I recall correctly, you actually used every single one of those tea bags." "I saved the Earl Grey for the most homesick moments," he admitted, reaching across the small breakfast table to take her hand. "But this time, I think I'll need something stronger than tea to get through missing you." The honesty in his words made Catherine's chest tighten. Even after all these years, William still had the ability to surprise her with his openness. In public, he maintained the composed dignity expected of a future king. In private moments like this, he was simply the man who had won her heart by being genuinely, completely himself. Their staff began moving around the palace with increased efficiency, the telltale signs that departure time was approaching. Catherine could hear hushed conversations in the corridors, the soft sound of luggage being moved, and the distant hum of security preparations. These sounds had become familiar over the years, but today they felt like a countdown she wasn't ready to face. "I should probably check on the final security briefing," William said reluctantly, but he made no move to leave the table. His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of Catherine's hand, and she could feel him memorizing the moment just as she was. 5 more minutes, Catherine said, surprising herself with how much she sounded like Louis when he didn't want bedtime to arrive. "Please, just 5 more minutes." William smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and made the corners crinkle in that way that had always made her feel like the luckiest woman in the world. 5 more minutes, he agreed. Actually, let's make it 10. They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the morning light grow stronger through the windows. Catherine tried to memorize everything about this moment. The way William's hair caught the sunlight, the gentle pressure of his fingers against hers, the sound of his steady breathing, the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the coffee and the fresh flowers that always filled their private spaces. Outside, London was waking up to another busy day. People were rushing to work, children were walking to school, and life was moving forward in its usual rhythm. But inside this quiet room, time felt suspended, as if the universe understood that some moments deserved to last a little longer than others. The soft knock on the door came exactly when they both knew it would. William's private secretary appeared with an apologetic smile and the gentle but firm reminder that schedules waited for no one, not even princes who wanted to hold their wives' hands for just a few more precious minutes. "It's time," William said quietly, squeezing Catherine's hand one last time before slowly standing up. Catherine walked beside William through the familiar corridors of the palace, their footsteps echoing softly against the polished floors. The walls were lined with portraits of ancestors who had faced their own separations, their own duties, their own moments of choosing between personal desires and royal obligations. Catherine wondered if any of those painted faces had felt this same mix of pride and heartache. The staff they passed offered respectful nods and kind smiles, but Catherine could see the understanding in their eyes. Many of them had worked for the royal family for years, witnessing countless departures and reunions. They knew the weight of these moments, the way duty could both honor and burden those who carried it. As they approached the main entrance, Catherine could see the black car waiting outside through the glass doors. The sight made her stomach flutter with the same nervous energy she had felt before her wedding day, except this time it was tinged with sadness rather than joy. The driver stood at attention beside the vehicle, and she could spot the discreet security detail positioned around the courtyard. "Remember when we used to worry about normal things?" Catherine asked with a wry smile, trying to lighten the mood. "Like whether we had enough milk in the refrigerator or if we remembered to pay the electricity bill?" William laughed softly. "I never had to worry about the electricity bill, even in university. Perks of being royal, I suppose. But I do remember when our biggest concern was whether you'd say yes to that second date." "You were so nervous," Catherine recalled, the memory bringing warmth to her voice. "You spilled coffee on yourself twice during that phone call. I could hear you muttering apologies to what I later realized was probably your shirt." "That shirt never recovered," William said with mock seriousness. "It's probably still traumatized somewhere in a donation bin, warning other clothes about the dangers of being worn by nervous princes." Their gentle laughter felt like a small act of rebellion against the sadness of the moment. Catherine loved how William could still make her laugh even when her heart felt heavy. It was one of the things that had drawn her to him from the beginning, his ability to find lightness even in serious moments, to be both the future king and the man who could make her giggle like a schoolgirl. They reached the entrance hall, where members of William's travel team were waiting with final documents and last-minute briefings. Catherine watched as William shifted into his official mode, listening intently to security updates and schedule changes. Even in these final moments before departure, his responsibilities continued to pull at him, but his eyes kept finding hers across the small crowd of staff members. Every few seconds their gazes would meet, and she would see past the prince to the man who was struggling with this goodbye just as much as she was. Those brief moments of connection felt like lifelines in the sea of official duties surrounding them. "Your Royal Highness, we really should begin moving toward the vehicle," the lead protection officer said gently. Catherine had known him for years, and she could hear the reluctance in his voice. Even the security team understood that some moments needed to be handled with extra care. William nodded, then turned to face Catherine fully for the first time since they had left their private quarters. The bustling activity around them seemed to fade into the background as they looked at each other, both trying to find the right words for a goodbye that felt too important for ordinary language. "Take care of yourself," Catherine said, her hands reaching up to straighten his tie even though it didn't need adjusting. It was the same gesture she had made thousands of times before, but today her fingers lingered a little longer against the silk fabric. "Eat properly, get enough sleep, and don't let them schedule you into exhaustion. I promise to be the most well-behaved prince Australia has ever seen," William replied, his hands coming up to cover hers against his chest. "Though I make no guarantees about the jet lag making me coherent during those early morning events." "Just be yourself," Catherine said softly. "That's all anyone could ask for, and it's more than enough." The simple words carried the weight of years of shared experiences, of understanding what it meant to represent something larger than themselves while still remaining true to who they were as individuals. Catherine had watched William grow into his role over the years, had seen him find the balance between duty and authenticity that made him such an effective representative of the crown. The staff began moving toward the doors, a subtle signal that the departure could not be delayed much longer. Catherine felt William's hands tighten slightly around hers, and she knew he was feeling the same reluctance to let this moment end. "The children will want pictures," she said, trying to focus on practical matters to keep her emotions steady. "Lots of pictures. George is starting a geography project about Australia, and Charlotte wants to see what the people wear. Louis just wants to see everything, but especially any animals." "I'll document everything," William promised, "though I suspect I'll end up with more pictures of koalas than actual official events. The children's requests tend to take priority over state functions." "As they should," Catherine replied, smiling at the thought of William sneaking away from formal dinners to photograph wildlife for their children. One of the staff members approached with William's coat and travel documents, another gentle reminder that time was running short. Catherine watched as William shrugged into the coat, the simple action somehow making the departure feel suddenly, painfully real. They walked together toward the doors, their steps slower than usual, as if both were trying to stretch these final moments as long as possible. The morning air would be crisp outside, Catherine knew, and there would be photographers positioned at a respectful distance to capture images of the departure. "Ready?" William asked, pausing with his hand on the door handle. Catherine nodded, even though she wasn't sure she would ever feel truly ready for goodbyes like this. "Ready," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. As they stepped outside into the bright morning sunlight, Catherine could see the small crowd of photographers and reporters gathered beyond the palace gates. They maintained their distance, but she knew that cameras with long lenses were already focusing on them, ready to capture whatever happened next. The car seemed both too close and not close enough. Soon William would be inside it, and then he would be gone, and she would return to their empty quarters to begin the long process of missing him. The morning breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves and the distant sounds of London awakening to another day. Catherine felt the cool air against her face as she and William walked the final steps toward the waiting car. Each step felt significant, like they were walking towards something that would change everything, even though she knew William had taken hundreds of trips before and would return safely as he always did. The driver opened the car door with practiced efficiency, the soft click of the handle seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet courtyard. William's luggage had already been loaded, his travel team was ready, and all the official preparations were complete. There was nothing left to delay the inevitable moment of separation. "I'll call tonight," William said, turning to face Catherine one last time before getting into the car. "It will be morning there, so perfect timing for breakfast with the children." "They'll love that," Catherine replied, her voice catching slightly on the words. "George has been practicing his Australian accent. It's terrible, but he's very proud of it." "I can't wait to hear it," William said, and Catherine could see that he meant it. Even in the midst of official duties and state functions, their children remained his priority, the reason he worked so hard to make these trips meaningful. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, both aware that cameras were capturing this moment, but neither caring about anything beyond their own need to memorize each other's faces. William's eyes held the same mixture of love and reluctance that Catherine felt in her own heart. The protection officer cleared his throat gently, a kind but necessary reminder that schedules and security protocols could not wait indefinitely. Catherine knew that airports had their own rhythms, that flights departed according to precise timetables that made no allowances for personal feelings. "I should let you go," Catherine said, though every word felt like it was being pulled from somewhere deep inside her chest. "I don't want to go," William admitted quietly, his voice so soft that only Catherine could hear it. "I never want to go when it means leaving you." The simple honesty of his words broke through the careful composure Catherine had been maintaining all morning. She felt tears gathering in her eyes, despite her efforts to stay strong. This was the man she had fallen in love with, not the prince, not the future king, but the person who could admit his vulnerabilities without shame. "But you will go," Catherine said gently, "because that's who you are. Because you understand that sometimes loving someone means doing difficult things for important reasons." William reached for her then, his arms coming around her in a movement that felt as natural as breathing. Catherine melted into the embrace, her own arms wrapping around him with the fierce tenderness of someone who knew exactly how precious these moments were. The hug was different from their usual goodbyes. Usually their public farewells were brief and formal, appropriate for their roles and the watching eyes. But this embrace felt like it belonged to them alone, despite the cameras and the staff and the protocol that usually governed their every public moment. William held her close, one hand cradling the back of her head, while the other pressed against her spine as if he could somehow keep her safe through touch alone. Catherine could feel his heartbeat against her cheek, steady and strong, and she tried to memorize the rhythm so she could remember it during the lonely moments ahead. "I love you," he whispered against her hair, the words meant for her ears alone, but somehow feeling like they filled the entire courtyard. "I love you too," she whispered back, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Come home safe." "Always," he promised, and Catherine knew he meant it with every fiber of his being. They held each other for what felt like both an eternity and an instant. Catherine was aware of the world continuing around them, the gentle murmur of staff conversations, the distant sound of traffic beyond the palace walls, the soft click of camera shutters capturing their moment. But none of it seemed to matter compared to the warmth of William's arms around her. When they finally, reluctantly began to separate, Catherine could see that William's eyes were bright with unshed tears that matched her own. There was something beautiful and heartbreaking about seeing this strong man, who carried so much responsibility on his shoulders, allowing himself to feel the full weight of this goodbye. 3 weeks, Catherine said, managing a watery smile. "It's just 3 weeks." "Just 3 weeks," William agreed, though they both knew that love made time elastic, stretching moments of joy and separation alike until they felt much longer than any calendar could measure. William leaned down and kissed her forehead, a gentle press of lips that felt like a blessing and a promise combined. Catherine closed her eyes and tried to capture every detail, the warmth of his breath against her skin, the familiar scent of his cologne, the tender way his hand cupped her face. "Take care of our babies," he said softly. "Tell them stories about their papa who misses them already." "Every night," Catherine promised. "And I'll send you videos of all the moments you'll want to see." William smiled then, the expression transforming his face from sad to hopeful. "I'll be the most well-documented prince in royal history by the time I get back." The driver stood patiently by the open car door, and Catherine knew that this was truly the final moment. William seemed to understand too, because he took a step backward, his hand lingering on hers until the last possible second. "I'll see you soon," he said, his voice carrying all the love and promise he couldn't express in a more public setting. "See you soon?" Catherine echoed, watching as he turned and walked toward the car. As William slid into the back seat, Catherine felt the cool autumn air rush into the space where his warmth had been. She wrapped her arms around herself and stepped back as the driver closed the door with a soft thud that seemed to echo in her chest. Through the car window, she could see William's silhouette. He raised his hand in a small wave, and Catherine waved back, her smile wobbling but genuine. The car began to move slowly down the drive, and Catherine stood watching until it disappeared beyond the palace gates. The photographers had captured it all: the tender embrace, the reluctant separation, the final waves goodbye. By evening, the images would be shared around the world, with headlines about love and duty and the human moments that made the royal family relatable despite their extraordinary circumstances. But Catherine knew that the real story wasn't in the photographs. The real story was in the way William's arms had held her, like she was the most precious thing in the world, in the way they had both allowed themselves to feel the full weight of love and separation, in the promise that some bonds are strong enough to bridge any distance. As she walked back toward the palace entrance, Catherine already found herself counting the hours until William's promised phone call, already planning the stories she would share with the children about their father's journey. 3 weeks stretched ahead of her, but they were 3 weeks with an end date, 3 weeks that would be followed by a reunion that would make every day of waiting worthwhile. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, and London continued its busy rhythm around the palace walls. Inside, Catherine would return to her own duties and responsibilities, carrying with her the memory of a hug that had said everything words couldn't express. Love, after all, was not just about the moments of being together. It was about the strength to let go when duty called, knowing that some connections transcended physical distance.